Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Here's what taxpayers should do if they have missing or incorrect documents. IRS Tax Tip 2021-26, March 1st, 2021. Taxpayers should double check to make sure they have all their documents before filing a tax return. Taxpayers who haven't received a W-2 or Form 1099 should contact the employer, payer, or issuing agency and request the missing documents. So obviously, when you're creating or making the tax return, you want to make sure you have all the documentation. Probably the most important documentation for most people being the W-2 form. If you don't have the W-2 form, then the employer should send it out. They're required to send it out. So you want to contact the employer and make sure you have that information, as well as any information for a 1099 type of income, which could be from banks or something like that, where you might have the 1099 type of income, and you want to make sure you have the correct documentation there as well. Remember that the W-2 form and 1099 forms are not only going to you, they are going to the IRS as well, or they're going to the government in any case. And therefore, if you don't put the same amounts on your tax return on the Form W-2, for example, quite likely that you will get a response from the IRS requesting a change, and that could, of course, delay the process of possibly getting a refund. So you want to get it right the first time, get the thing processed, and get the refund. If you don't get the form, then you got to contact the employer, or that's the first place to go to try to get the documentation. So this also applies for those who receive an incorrect W-2 or Form 1099. So if something is wrong with it, this is another kind of issue, a different kind of issue, because if you get a W-2 or 1099 that is incorrect, then you might say, hey, look, this is incorrect. I'm going to try to address this on my tax return, and then file the tax return and tell the IRS, hey, look, this thing was incorrect. But that's going to be a little bit more long of a way to do it. It's going to be more difficult to do that because, again, these forms went to the IRS, and the IRS is going to depend on them to double check your taxes. So what you want to do in order to get everything flowing as quickly as possible is, if possible, go back to the employer or the issuer of the 1099 that was incorrect and say, hey, look, you've got to recorrect that W-2 or 1099 because it's wrong. And if you don't correct it, then the IRS is going to have that wrong information. And if I file the tax return using the right numbers, then the IRS is going to possibly delay the return and check it and basically try to compare it to the W-2 information, and it'll be more of a problem. So your first stop all the time to make things go smoothly is, if you have an incorrect W-2 or 1099, is to go to the issuer of the form, the payer, and say, hey, look, I really need you to amend this, which for the employer, they're kind of required to do that. So you would think the employer would have a good incentive to get it right. If it's the Form W-2, then there's certain circumstances where you might be more likely that someone just messed up the 1099. Could be more likely that you got an incorrect 1099 or something like that. And again, you got to go to the issuer of the 1099. That would be the first place to go and see if you can get that corrected. So if they can't get the forms, they must still file their tax return on time. To avoid filing incomplete or amended return, they may need to use Form 4852, substitute Form W-2 wage and tax statement, or Form 1099-R distributions from pension, annuities, retirement, or profit-sharing plans, IRAs, insurance, contracts, etc. If a taxpayer doesn't receive the missing or corrected form in time to file their tax return, they can estimate the wages or payments made to them, as well as any taxes withheld. So what you want to do, if you're going to say, if you got a wrong W-2 or 1099, and then it's past the deadline, you've tried to get the corrected form or the form itself, and you can't do it, then the IRS is saying you still need to file the tax return. When you file the tax return, you want to use the correct numbers or your best guess as the correct number so that you can actually file the tax return. If you weren't able to get a corrected 1099 or W-2 form, then you still want to use the corrected numbers. You want to try to address it on their side so they can fix it. But if you can't get that in time, you got to file the tax return with your best numbers you can. And then when you process the tax return, if you couldn't get the corrected documentation, it could take a little bit longer to basically the IRS trying to match it up to what they've received, and you might get a letter on it and whatnot, and it'll be a longer process for that to go forward. So that's why your first step is to go to the issuer, try to fix it, and then if not, you got to make your best guess and then move forward from there. So then use the Form 4852 to report this information on the federal tax return. So if they receive the missing or corrected Form W-2 or Form 1099-R after filing their return and the information differs from the previous estimate, they must file Form 1040-X, amended U.S. individual income tax return. So if you basically got documentation, you said, hey, look, I got to file, I want to file now, I'm going to file even though my W-2 or 1099 was incorrect, or I didn't get it, so I'm going to file with my best guess on it. And then if you get the Form W-2 or 1099 later, and it's different than what you filed then, and it's the correct number at that point, you got to amend the tax return then, which is with the Form 1040-X. Now, on occasion, the IRS might actually get the documentation, and if they match it up to the documentation, and they might make an adjustment and send a letter to you and say, hey, look, we made an adjustment to your taxes based on the information that we have, and you might go forward from that point. But typically, if you have to file and then you get later information that is different than what you filed and you know that it's different, then you want to file the Form 1040-X so that you're making sure that you take the proactive action. If it results in a refund, then obviously you want to do it as soon as possible to get the refund. If it results in you owing money, you still want to do it as soon as possible because, you know, any delay will result in possibly further or an increase in penalties and interest. And those penalties and interest can be higher if it's not proactive, if you're not proactive on it. If the IRS comes back and tells you that you owe them more money, you know, sometimes, you know, it could result in higher penalties and interest rather than if you were proactive and you did the form amended return and proceeded that way. So in any case, most taxpayers should have received income documents near the end of January, including Form W-2 wage and tax statements, Form 1099 miscellaneous income, Form 1099 INT interest income, Form 1099 NEC non-employee compensation. That's kind of the new one. So many people that got Form 1099 miscellaneous last year might be getting a Form 1099 NEC non-employee compensation this year. Form 1099G certain government payments like unemployment compensation or state tax refund. And that's the other one that many more people will be getting most likely this year than in prior years because more people possibly were on unemployment at some point in time. That is going to be taxable. You should get a Form 1099G with relation to it. Incorrect Form 1099G for unemployment benefits. Many people received unemployment compensation in 2020. For some, this may have been the first time ever received unemployment. These taxpayers need to know that unemployment compensation is taxable and must be included on their tax return. Taxpayers who receive an incorrect Form 1099G unemployment benefits they did not receive should contact the issuing state agency to request a revised Form 1099G showing they did not receive these benefits. So same kind of principle as with any 1099 form. If you get an incorrect 1099 form and the IRS is saying that's an increased level of people that may have gotten, that are going to get possibly incorrect 1099 forms this year due to the fact that more people were eligible for unemployment benefits, and even if you didn't take them, that opens up the door for identity fraud for someone else to try to use your information to take the unemployment benefits. So it's possible, and IRS is basically saying that there's an increased level of fraud in that case, or in that way, that people have stolen the identity and then filed unemployment for unemployment benefits and then received it so that the unemployment benefits did not go to the person who they should have gone to. In that case, then the taxpayer is going to get a Form 1099G. And you didn't get, if you're the taxpayer, you didn't get the benefit because someone stole your identity and they took the money. And so you shouldn't be paying taxes on that. So then you got to go to the state agency and say, hey, look, I didn't really get the money. I would like you to amend the 1099G. This does look like an issue that the states should be aware of at this point in time. And then move forward in the same process with the 1099. File your tax return the proper way. Try to get the 1099 fixed. And if you can't, then you file the tax return anyways using the correct numbers and then move forward from there. So taxpayers who are unable to obtain a timely corrected form from states should still file an accurate tax return, reporting only the income they received. More information can be found at the links below and amended returns. Should I file an amended return? Let us help you. An IRS services guide. There's links to those information here. There'll be a link to this in the description.